The path to value is emotion, and the way to understanding emotion is empathy. If I can be empathetic and understand the emotions of customers, then I can understand sort of what was really valuable to them. When they talk about loyalty programs and membership and I want to build relationships with my customers, what they're really talking about is scaled empathy. Like, how do I take what I can do on a one-to-one basis very, very easily, and how do I scale that across my entire organization, represent that organization through the brand, and then connect to millions of customers?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another conversation with. My name is Terrence Fox, Head of Innovation with iAdvise, and today I'm joined by, let's see how good of a job I can do at actually trying to make him blush, a real leader when it comes to creating a truly impactful customer experience. This gentleman spent years refining the CX for brands like Beachbody, Nike, and now Verizon, where in his current role, he's tasked with being ahead on the leading edge of the continuous retail evolution. For those holding your breath, yes, we actually got the Larry Rodgers to join us. Larry, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you, Tim. That you did. I am well done. You've accomplished your goal. I am quite embarrassed at this point, so thank you
Cool, good,
for the wonderful
perfect. And
introduction.
Larry, as a quick one-off, is it a part of your job search requirements to have some sort of continuous swoosh or check mark in the logo of the companies you work at?
Yes, that's it. That's all
Yeah,
I'm allowed to contractually work for companies that have some semblance of a similar brand mark. So yeah,
yeah. I was laughing at your shirt. I was like, man, I could almost confuse that for Nike if it wasn't red and a little tighter.
right.
Well, thank you so much for the time. And of course, today's title is around understanding the evolution of retail. Obviously, we can talk through what you feel you're comfortable sharing about Verizon specifically or your previous experience. But before we get into the topic, Larry, how have you been? How's the last year and a half? It's a little more normal in New York, right?
It is. My family and I, we moved out to New York in March of this year, so we're
Mm.
in Lower Manhattan, and people have told us that it has been light and not the same. But I'll tell you, coming from Oregon most recently, there's plenty of people here. I feel like the city is plenty busy, so
Yeah.
we've been enjoying ourselves absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it would have been quite a bit different to be there a year ago,
That's right.
good timing. Larry, you spend so much of your time talking through refining the customer experience and ensuring you create an optimal customer experience. But talk about yourself as a consumer. Have you had any particularly memorable experiences that you've seen or gone through recently?
Mm. Yeah, actually, I make it a point to. I'm one of the people. There's a continuum, right? And there's some of us who they love what has happened over this past several years, where most of any transaction or interaction with a brand that you can make can be done online.
Mm.
And they love that, and they'll stay in their home. And my wife's one of those. She'll buy tons of things online. She has them delivered directly to her door. She tries a million things on, keeps one and then ships the rest back.
Yeah.
I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I like going into doors. Like, I like going into a store. I like the energy of the people around. I like the inspiration that the visual merchandising gives you. Like, I love it. So I spend a lot of time there. I recently went to the Google store, which recently opened up in Manhattan, which
Oh,
is an
cool.
amazing experience. It's a one of a kind. So if you're ever in the neighborhood, please go check that out. And then I'm have a little bit of a dork geeky side, and so I was happy to have visited the Harry Potter store, which has recently opened as
Ah,
well.
cool.
And
Okay.
that's a treat. If you're into that, that's a treat. So I'll say that.
Yeah, I think I stopped at Prisoner of Azkaban when I read it. I don't even
Ooh,
know
don't
what book that
you
is.
got to keep going. You got to
Yeah,
finish it.
yeah. Yeah, very neat, and obviously a lot to relate to. I'm very similar household here. We generally have about 7 packages a day, it seems, and we keep one of them. Not me. It is my wife doing something similar.
Yep.
But I'm the same way. Maybe it's from years of biking, but if I'm going to buy something, I have to actually see it, try it on, make sure it
Mm.
fits. I guess I'm weirdly proportioned from years of biking and other things that I've done. So not a luxury I can enjoy to be able to purchase and trust that it'll be what I want when it gets here.
That's right. A large isn't a large in all sense of the word. So
No,
you got to try
no,
it on.
absolutely. I wanted to jump right in. Again, the title is Understanding the Evolution of Retail, taking a look at Verizon and some of your other experiences. Give us kind of your own self assessment of today's customer and really what you think brands need to keep in mind when engaging with them.
That's a great question. So I think the first is to understand sort of the context in which we're operating and brands are operating with today. There's a ton of pressure all over, and everything from the way our cities are behave,
Mm,
people moving in and out of cities for various reasons, and how we think about spaces with a lot of people versus personal space, safety, health, etc. You start to think about things like how we take into consideration some of the ways that brands are thinking about themselves in terms of having a monobrand presence or
mm,
being affiliated with a multi-brand player like an Amazon, et cetera. And you start to think about sort of the ways that the acceleration of digital capabilities that have happened so rapidly, especially over the last year and beyond. Consumers have a ton of different choice and options with the ways that they're able to interact with brands. And so I think one of the most important things to consider is how all of these sort of factors are shaping the ways that consumers experience your brand, and then also how it changes the competitive landscape. For example, there are some brands there are a lot of brands that are sort of creeping into each other's space, if you will. Like
mm,
what was traditionally a kind of industry with a certain amount of players is no longer that in today.
right.
Google's a great example of that. Amazon's a great example of that, of playing all over. Quite recently, Virgin Galactic and Richard Branson over the weekend, just flew into outer space. And
Right.
Virgin started as a music company, and then they went into airlines, and they're doing. I mean, they're disrupting all kinds of industries, and now they're in commercial space travel.
Mm,
And in a couple weeks or so, Jeff Bezos and his Blue Origin team is set to do the same exact thing. So like there's so much there's so many options, and so much sort of pressure and consideration of the ways that brands are introducing themselves to consumers and how consumers are interacting with it. So it's a really interesting time, but also I think a very from a brand perspective, it's one to consider in terms of how you position yourself competitively and how consumers will receive you, and the value that you bring to them.
Yeah, I think this is especially interesting due to your background, right? And I'll ask you whether it's Verizon or Nike, two household names, but how does this approach and way of thinking? How is it actually special for someone like Verizon who's got a store on every corner, naturally in a presence that's as ubiquitous as Nike and vice versa? How do you really take advantage of this kind of crazy time for opportunity?
That's a great question. Verizon has something around the end of nearly 7,000 stores, which,
Mm,
don't quote me on this, but I think that puts Verizon in the United States like top 10 retailers in terms of size. So it's massive distribution.
mm,
And when you think about sort of how to create or an approach that we might think of in terms of how to create some differentiation between the experience that you see and you receive at a Verizon store versus any other retailer that you would go visit.
right.
A couple of things come to mind. We You can almost at a macro level think about the experience intent that brands have to deliver, especially in the retail context.
Mm,
Consumers are going to come to the door for one of four things. They're going to come there for convenience. It's right around the corner, and I can get in and out fast. They're going to come in for validation. I'm not quite sure if this is the right thing for me, or I have questions. I want to get a little bit more. Can you build confidence that this is the right thing for me to buy and purchase?
right.
Uh, they're going to come in for personalization, like the experience I get here is better than anywhere else. The best example of that are small businesses, mom and pop shops. You go, I know. Hey, same thing, Charlie. Like
Yeah.
it's the cheers. They know me everywhere I go. That's the best experience of that.
Right.
And then lastly, inspiration. And so when you think about inspiration, that's where larger brands have, I think, an advantage there of how can you show a person like a glimpse into the future and what is the future going to be. And for Verizon, a technology company, I think an opportunity we have is to think about how to bring inspiration to customers and show them what the future of technology and connectivity means and how that can enable and empower their lives in a way that they never imagined. So those are some examples of ways that I think Verizon is starting to think about how do we bring leverage our distribution to get to consumers a quick and easy solution for their technology needs, but also move into a space where we're starting to think about delivering deeper personalization and broader inspiration, connecting worlds of people, world communities, cultures, etc.,
Mm.
in the context of a retail space to really deliver a glimpse of the future and how that can enable you.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I know Verizon is at least from discussions I've seen in the past, calls itself a disruptor of its own business model frequently,
Yeah,
right? You like to disrupt and change things on the fly and make sure that, in my opinion, as an outsider, nothing is stale about the Verizon experience. It's very innovative and constantly evolving. Have you had any particularly magic touches, we'll call it, that have brought value to the customer base over the past? I know you've only been there for a handful of months, but
that's
any
right.
insight you can share there?
Yeah, so Terrence, I mean, you're being very kind. Listen, you're right. I've been with Verizon for just over 170 plus days,
Yeah,
and I'll say
grizzled vet, right?
yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's right. I'll say we've got a lot of work to do. Like
yeah,
there's no one within the organization that you would talk to that wouldn't agree that we have a lot of opportunity ahead of us, which is actually great
mm,
because as Verizon thinks about itself as a company that can poise itself for growth, the opportunity that Verizon has is actually quite massive. And so I'll talk about to your point about a couple of things that we have had that we've launched in recent times that are really interesting and I think bring magic to retail. But before that, I just want to say the work ahead of us is first before we bring first we get what we have to do is make it work.
mm,
Let's make it work. We have to make sure that the experience you have day in and day out is consistent and that
right,
it meets expectations. Once we do that, then we can make it easy and we can make it easier and improve our journeys, start to iterate and evolve the journey so that the experience that you have is seamless and easy. And
mm,
then we can get to the part where we start to make it magical and we can
yeah,
start to like bring in some flavor and throw a little bit extra spice in. But I'll say some of the things that we're starting to do from a capability perspective and that you've seen over the last couple of years, I think are hints of some of the direction we start to go in terms of how we can think about a future of a physical retail environment that is new and unique. We introduced in late 2019 and actually over 2020, we launched six of the total eight of our Express concept. And it really, that Express concept is a completely different model than your traditional Verizon store, where the traditional store has a very predictable and traditional sort of operating model in terms of how you think about staffing the space and how the sort of the role of the representative in the store and
right,
what they do and how they interact with you as a customer. It has a different footprint and even has different sort of capabilities from fixtures to digital capabilities. This
mm,
Express store has a flexible model. It exists in the west side of the country in cities like Denver, Colorado, cities like Portland, Oregon, cities that have sort of a consumer that has a really strong desire and appetite for digital, but
yeah,
also places where there are interesting foot traffic patterns and ways where you can start to serve consumers both through a distribution model that provides convenience, but also gives a glimpse of just a new way of working and operating a store that we haven't thought through before. So we're learning a ton
right,
through that concept in terms of the way of optimizing flexible operating models and pointing us to a future store format. So we're really excited about that.
mm,
The second thing that I'll call out is we started to test in the near term different capabilities that I think will be really, really interesting as we move forward. many of those capabilities have to do with models that combine sort of the power of what it means to be in physical and how you amplify the human-to-human interaction. And then others that sort of take into consideration how you can transform a physical space into one that can completely show you a new way to interact with the brand and a new way to think about fulfillment. So there's some things that we have in the works and some things that we've launched that are MVP stage right now that I won't go too farther into, but are very exciting in terms of thinking about how to leverage AI, how to leverage automation, and how to leverage digital capabilities to really power up our human offense.
Yeah, so 170 days. I can't quiz you too hard on Verizon, but Larry, the natural topic, and frankly, this comes up with me pretty frequently when I'm talking to clients who are looking to bridge the in-store to digital experience, and actually with 7,000 stores yourself, that's a topic I'm sure that a lot of people are discussing at Verizon, like you were just talking about. But the big pain point in that scenario is, how do I possibly align all of these siloed teams to try and bullhead something that can actually get accomplished here, right? There's a lot of people to involve, teams and departments, and maybe different ways that they're all incentivized. That doesn't always mix and mean that the best experience for the consumer. How do you, Verizon maybe out of the picture for this example, right? How do you recommend a company, materialize something like this internally? How do you possibly get all of the teams floating in the same direction?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right. I have a lot of work to do at Verizon specifically in that case. Especially when you're considering large organizations like a Verizon or like a Nike that are matrixed in nature, by definition, and especially when you're in a CX, a position of, you have a CX in your title. By definition, sort of the work that you do requires that you take a cross-functional approach to bring to life a vision. And so the first thing I would say is, realize that your team is not just your direct line. Like the team is the fully encompassed cross-functional team around the organization. And so when you think about the team in that context, if you have a clear vision, then you can bring the right team together to build the strategy together. If you build the strategy together and not in a silo box, now all of a sudden you have buy-in, you have energy, you have momentum.
Right.
And so that's the first thing is like your team is not your direct line. It's the team with a capital T. Right. And so I think that's number one. The second thing I would say is essentially, ensure that you have a clear vision. And when you have that clear vision, that you're ensuring that your team, and this is more as a leader than anything else, but that your team that's helping to power that, your job is to help set that vision, make sure you have the right team in place, and then remove roadblocks for them. And so if you can do that effectively, that I think will be sort of a formula that at least I've used to see some success in the past.
And Larry, talk to me about another topic. So segueing away here is, tell me a little bit about user-centered design and how you've actually incorporated that into building an optimal customer experience.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit plug here. I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Design Museum Everywhere. And Design Museum is an amazing group. And I'll say there's this concept and idea. The reason I love that so much is because I am not a traditional designer, right? I didn't go to school for graphic design or even industrial design, but literally my entire career has been creating, crafting, designing experiences for consumers. And in fact, as Design Museum likes to talk about, we like to talk about this idea of sort of design is really a creative problem-solving process. That's really what it is at the core. And so if you can think about design with a capital D in that way, you can start to broaden your scope and identify that there's design in many types of forms. And so what we do in CX and what we do in retail design, it's and to your question about sort of user-centered design, we look to creatively solve problems for customers. There is a there's a company called IDEO. It's a very famous design company, and they sort of talk about like their design philosophy as sort of like empathy for the end user is like the primary tenet. Having empathy for the end user, and they talk about like you do two things. One, you observe them doing things, like go watch them go do the things, and then put yourself in the situation and go do those things yourself. And I think that's so simple and brilliant in terms of like a process to think about in terms of building empathy for the end user. And taking that a step further, one of my design mentors, his name's Sean Madden. He referenced years ago. He said, "Hey, Larry, go read this book. It's called Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman." And Design of Everyday Things has been written and rewritten a couple times, but one of the things that Don Norman talks about that takes that idea a step further is this idea of sort of like design. It was one of his principles, which is sort of design for error. And he essentially says like, if you run into if you run into a problem, like you mess up as an individual, it's not your fault. It's bad design. So it's never the user's fault. It's always design's fault. And the reason that the tenet he talks about there is like we are inherently flawed as humans. And so we have to, as designers, build for that. We have to design for the inherent flaw that we have, which is we're going to not read things. We're going to not follow instructions. Like we're just not going to do those things that like rational people or rational engineers might even think about. Right. So as designers, we have to build for that irrationality and sort of that flaw that we have as humans. And I love that. I think that's a really, really important kind of tenet to think through.
And so I want to take one final stab into the retail evolution, because I know, of course, we've kind of worked through your thoughts on really kind of staying ahead of the curve and the things you need to be cognizant of. But let's actually talk through emotion and cognition and why you believe they're important in the retail evolution space.
Yeah. So actually, through the same publication, Don Norman, he talks about in Design of Everyday Things, he talks about this idea of sort of cognition attempts to make sense of the world. Emotion assigns value. And I find that so powerful. It's something I talk to people about all the time. I like to think of, if I can be almost cheesy for a second, like I'll call it like the value chain. Yeah. I'll be a little cheesy. Like let's think about this concept of like the value chain. So if you believe that value, and this is like you can go on Google and look up the definition of value, and you'll read something to this effect of sort of value equals the importance, worth, or usefulness of a thing, of something. And even beyond that, you can think of it as sort of one's almost like understanding or judgment of the importance of a thing or something in life. And so if that's what value is, then you can say, okay, great, I understand what value is. Then you need to understand what emotion is. And so what is emotion? There's another really great sort of author and speaker named Brene Brown. Yep. And she talks about this idea that sort of empathy is connecting the emotions that underpin an experience. And so when you can think about empathy as sort of connecting the emotions and getting to emotions, and you understand that value is the key to emotion, then you sort of have this idea of this value chain. It's the path to value is emotion, and the way to understanding emotion is empathy. And so then you can understand why companies like IDEO focus on empathy, because they understand that if I can be empathetic and understand the emotions of customers, then I can understand sort of what was really valuable to them. Right. And we know that emotion is what's driving our value because, just in our language, we have things like, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? And, well, I'm not really sure, but my gut tells me. When we say things like my gut tells me, that's because our mind, our cognition our frontal lobe doesn't have actually the language to describe the emotion. But we have a feeling about it and we've assigned a value to it. And so if you can understand that the path to value is emotion and the way to understanding emotion is empathy, now you have this concept that to be cheesy, I'll call it the value chain, that really talks about why sort of emotion is so important, and why companies like IDEO focus on empathy as sort of a key tenet of their design principles. So I think, that's a really important thing to consider. And then just lastly, the thing I'll say about that is really as what brands and companies are doing is when they talk about like, loyalty programs and membership and like, I want to build relationships with my customers, what they're really talking about is scaled empathy.
Right.
Like, how do I take what I can do on a one-to-one basis very, very easily? And how do I scale that across my entire organization, represent that organization through the brand, and then connect to millions of customers? So anyway, that's the challenge we have, and I think it's super hard. It's very messy because humans are messy,
Yeah.
but that's why it's fun.
Scaled empathy is something we use a lot too, so I had to write it down. I'm glad you used one of our big words.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So obviously I've kept you to your time. I'm sure you've got another interview, something already on your calendar, Larry. I want to make sure any closing words that you might have for the rest of the group about things to be aware of or things down the road, and not to put you on the spot, but anything that you think is particularly exciting or anything else you want to stress to the group.
Oh man, that's a great question. I'll say this because I was actually just speaking a little bit earlier today to a group of new leaders at Verizon.
Mm,
And in one of the questions was sort of like general advice that you have for me as a new leader. And one of the things I talked about that I think is important for individuals, as it is for brands, is invest and spend the time in understanding yourself. If you do that and you understand who you are, your value set, why you exist in this world,
mm,
everything else will fall from that. And I think the same principle, you can assign to a brand. If
right.
you as an organization know deeply and truly what your values are and why you exist in this world and what value you bring to others, now your decision making and how you come to market and how you deliver that becomes a lot. All of that becomes much simpler process. So anyway, invest in yourself, spend the time. It's hard, but it's worth it.
Cool. Well, Larry, thank you so much for the time. Obviously, great to see you again. And I'll find a way to drag you back on here somehow in the future.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate the
All
time.
ours. All our pleasure. Thank you, Larry. And again, Larry Rodgers, Head of Retail Evolution for Verizon. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again maybe next week, maybe the week after.